Welcome back to the International Classroom Podcast, where we delve into the ever-evolving intersection of education and technology. Now today we are thrilled to welcome back Stefan Bauschard, a true visionary in the realm of educational innovation. Stefan, a seasoned debate coach with an exceptional grasp of how artificial intelligence can transform learning environments, joins us once again to share his latest insights on generative AI and its profound impact on education. Now, his forward-thinking ideas have not only sparked global conversations, but have also inspired educators worldwide to reimagine the potential of AI in teaching and learning. Join us as we dive deeper into the transformative capabilities of AI with Stefan Bauschard. Now, before we begin, I've noticed something surprising. 77% of you tuning in haven't subscribed yet. Now, if you've enjoyed our journey through the world of education, could I ask a small favor from you? Please hit that subscribe button. It's a small action from you, but a giant leap for our podcast. Subscribing not only supports the show, but ensures you don't miss out on any of our future episodes. It's a win-win. So please take a moment, subscribe, and help us keep the educational adventure thriving. Thanks for being such awesome listeners. Now on to the episode. Stefan, thank you ever so much for coming back to speak to me. You are my first repeat interviewee. We were just talking when we said the last session, the first session we did, was April 2023. And we said at the very end of it, we said, right, in a year's time, let's see how things are in a year's time. And here we are, almost a year to the day, speaking again. How have you been?
I've been well. You know, I've got a little, addicted to all these things. I think they're all very interesting and, generally, and, how they impact work, my other line of work, my debate line of work, and had a chance to meet a lot of really interesting people. And it's, pretty exciting times. So I've been really kind of moving along with this. I'm glad to be back. If I remember correctly, I think, that's when you were just starting your podcast. Right. About a year ago. And I've really seen, you've had so many sessions, and the ones I've had the opportunity to listen to, I keep learning new things. And it's really expanded, right? There's so many great voices out there to listen to. And I think everybody's taking ideas, from one another and sharing them. So, thank you for the chance to amplify, as they say in AI, my own voice. And, thank you for getting the other voices out there, because we're all these are all ideas right now, right? And it's rapidly as things change, and will continue to change. They're always going to be ideas. I don't think we'll have, you can do a longitudinal study about whether a particular AI app worked, and by the time the longitudinal study is complete, not only will the app not exist, but the technology, we'll think of as an old Ford automobile. So, I think exactly. We're going to have to rock through a lot of our ideas and do our best.
Isn't it, to think, but actually in the scope of AI world and technology world, like you've said, it's things have amped up, things of, the technology that's available to us. But in some extent, it feels like actually very little has changed. And I remember when we were talking previously, obviously this vast book that had come out and these ideas about what we could do with ChatGPT. And that's obviously one of the reasons why we're back with this, in terms of to discuss the change and then also to talk more about the future. So from your perspective, obviously this year that's been and gone, what are some of the things that have you seen change on the educational and technological landscape?
Well, I think on the technological landscape, it's kind of been maybe what I would describe as a supercharging of everything that was happening, right? So obviously at text to text, that it's gotten a lot better at writing like a human. It very easily can be trained on your style. We have text to image. The images now are really incredible and somewhat indistinguishable from quote unquote, a real image. I don't know if you saw over the weekend the palace, in the UK released a photo of Kate and her children. And someone, people were initially saying, well, she doesn't have her ring on, and then other people were like, okay, well, she didn't have her ring on at the moment. And then it got debated, and it's kind of interesting because you think, well, yes, but that's for a normal person. Maybe they have their ring on or they don't. But when the palace is staging a photo, right, they tend to kind of get those things correct. But then other people said, well, maybe this is an AI image. And if you looked how her arms are around the kids, it was a little bit. And then the palace came out and said, well, she edited it herself with Adobe, which is kind of funny if you think about it, right? You have the major PR operation to be like if President Biden was editing his own photos before they were released to the public. But the whole point of there, without going into every detail, is we don't really know. We don't know if that was AI generated and they just don't want to say. We don't know how much editing happened, which brings up a second question. Like, okay, well, the photos have been edited for a long time. So exactly what's real and what's not. And, I'm teaching an intro to AI course at a college, and I put these 5 photos together, some of which were real, some of which were fake, AI generated. And I asked people to guess which ones were real and which ones are fake. And they were all confident they got them all 5 right. Nobody got more than 2 right. The average across all the people I've showed it to is like 2.5, which means like it's basically a random guess as to which ones. And that's, look, people say that technology keeps advancing, but it's only going to advance so far, which is totally real. It's real, but obviously we've seen more advances in text to video with things like Sora and even what Runway is doing and Pika. So, we have more advances there. We have better advances in, coding, right? Like coding's getting really good. So it was before. That was really what we had before we saw all these language things. And in ChatGPT 3.5, it could code pretty well. So I see a lot of advances that, and of course, the accuracy, right? The hallucinations are not solved, but are declining, right? Through things like RAG, AI feedback, more human feedback, more fine tuning, sometimes just rarely training a model on a specific data set. So, that's declining. So I kind of see more forward motion in terms of stuff that was like already in motion. Now, where I might see some material, like what I call material change, right? To use a legal term is, we're seeing agents built on top of these. And, the leading scientists like Andrew Nee at Stanford, he says, well, I can give my agent a goal and it'll run for about 30 minutes. There aren't too many people who can do that. But I've been working with this company, it's like an advisor that's building a online debate platform to help kids learn how to debate. But yesterday they had the AI agent write the first speech, including quotes. And U.S. debate use a lot of evidence or quotes, including quotes from the internet. Had another AI do a rebuttal using quotes. Had a third AI write the summary speeches, like summarizing kind of the students' arguments. That's a third level of debate. And then they had another AI judge the debate. And it wasn't really bad. I will say that it was certainly good, that maybe better than what kids could do who maybe debated like, say, 3 or 4 tournaments learning how to debate. It was certainly was substantially better than what they could accomplish. It was kind of, I would say, more like on the whole, like JV-ish level, end of first year, beginning of second year. So, that's just a foundation. Like those agents are able to do all that, without it. And then, we had been working on what you call a debate topic paper to propose a topic about a topic. And he said, we had a meeting the other day. He's like, the agent's researching the topic paper. I have it running during this meeting. So, you have agents doing things. And then, I think the wearables, that's not real. I don't know if that's a new technology, but that's an application, right? Like, you can, especially there were the Meta glasses. Now there's the brilliant glasses, which look, you can't distinguish those from regular glasses. They have models in the lens, in the frames, right? So you don't even necessarily have to be connected to the internet. And when you look down at the paper, you see something in French, it'll put it in English. If you see an item, it'll tell you what the item is. So, that is pretty broad implications for schools, which are not, that's not even talked about in any of the guidances that have been released. We talk about it in ours. But, kids are going to be able to roll into school next year with glasses that are indistinguishable from any pair of glasses that you and I might wear. Look down at their paper and literally have the answer right in front of them. So, those are going to, so that's more of an application, right? Like it could do all those things like before. Vision models are getting better, right? So that's a combination of technologies that are moving in that direction. So I'm not really surprised by anything that happens. It got a lot better, maybe a lot faster. The one thing I didn't really anticipate, I figured we'd see a model from, like Google. Meta obviously had a model, and I knew they had an internal model just because I knew some people who worked there, right? So I expected to see these other models. I didn't expect to see so many, right? There's like 400,000 models language models floating around. There's, like Language Model Studio. You can just download the ones you want, run them locally on your machines. I mean, Mistral just like exploded, right? So there's a lot more. There are a lot more models, and then you're starting to see the specialization of the models, right? So, the new Claude has a lot of training on finance, or unique training on finance and like medicine and biology, right? Which is something you don't see in the other models. The new Pi release is highly trained on it's better at math and it's better at the undergraduate curriculum, which makes sense because they're trying to get just users to talk to it, right? So you're also seeing a lot of specialization kind of within the models, which I think a lot of people don't really understand or pay attention to. I posted yesterday, everyone says there's all these studies on this Archfix thing all the time about the models can or can't do. It's like, okay, I've already started to completely ignore studies that say what ChatGPT 3.5 can and can't do. Who really cares? But now, even when you had ChatGPT 4, which for a long time was a frontier model, I mean, even that was still ignoring, models that were specifically fine-tuned for particular purposes or other models. But now we have a lot of other frontier models that everyone agrees, within range are basically kind of competitive. So, and I think a lot of people, that's one place that I think educators struggle a little bit with a misunderstanding, right? A lot of their impressions of what these models can do are based on old models and maybe just a single model, right? So people say, well, it's only been trained in English. Well, that was true. And it is still more heavily trained in English because a large part of what's on the internet is in English. But now it's been trained on the entirety of the public internet, right? 15 trillion tokens. It's trained on everything. You have models that can translate 80 languages, and even Meta, they have 80 that kind of the consumer can use. It's actually translated 202 languages in all directions, right? So, and there's Chinese data sets, there's Indonesian data sets, so the quality, right, of the quality of the models is also randomly expanding, but also in unique ways, right? Just like you wouldn't ask, Joe everything. Hey, Joe, I have a physics question. Hey, Joe, I have a legal question, right? Hey, Joe, I have a biology question, right? You would ask a different person for, at least to try to get a more specialized answer, even if you were uncertain about whether they knew the answer. So in some ways, it's knowing what model to interact with for a particular purpose improves the likelihood that you're going to find what you want. But to pull it back, those are some of the trends I see.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you about the models. And because I think there's an overwhelming amount of information, and therefore, all these different models coming through, that it's difficult to pinpoint and how down, right, what should I be using for this and which one gives better for this? And I'm in the same boat. I will use ChatGPT, and I've got Claude, I've got Gemini, and I still use Copilot, and I use them for different things. And I find that certain ones, in my opinion, are better for different things. ChatGPT for me, in terms of ideating ideas for things for lessons and lesson plans and creativity in that respect, I prefer that, which some people might be like, oh, no, you should be. But for me, as a science perspective, the types of things that I want to get back from it, having trialed Claude and trialed Gemini, I find that what I get from ChatGPT is better. However, there's other things in terms of writing or again, assessing or getting feedback from, where actually Gemini's proved really good with it, and Claude 3 has proved really good for it. Copilot for me is great for research because it's connected to the internet. So you can get the quotes. And so it's difficult. And this is from me I think who's been using it for a long time. If you're a teacher coming into it now who's new, then there's a lot. It's overwhelming. There's a lot to take in, and that actually kind of nicely connects into then one of the reasons and one of the things we want to talk about today, which is to do with this Innovation Academy. So just to give us a surmise of what it is, because obviously a friend of ours posted about it as well, and you've written about it. What is the idea behind this Innovation Academy?
I think, generally speaking, the idea is to kind of seed AI into a school without saying okay, we need to change the whole school, right? Because you don't need to change, and I could talk about this more later, everything about a school. There's a lot of things that happen in schools that are really great and need to continue happening. So for example, kids need to go to health class. They need to go to gym. They need to learn the basics, right? They need to learn, there's a lot of things, right? Like we don't need to like change the whole school, at least in my opinion. We need, maybe change a good amount. But I think the second thing is that's not really a path in, at least for most schools. I've only spoken with one school who's kind of like, we want to change like literally everything we do, right? Like other people like want to kind of change things, bring some things in. And even if maybe they personally think a broader change is necessary, they may have 10,000 employees and 50,000 students, and that's not going to happen by the fall of 2025, regardless of what their vision is, or 2024, regardless of what their vision is. So the idea behind the Innovation Academy is to seed this in to part of the school. And essentially, depending on what your school is able to do based on, regulations, to at least give the kids some sort of certificate that says, like, at the end of graduation, oh, I went through the Innovation Academy, right? Is like a supplemental thing. What does it include? I think at a minimum, or, and some of these are interchangeable, some type of basic like AI literacy, AI 101. What is AI? How's it going to impact the world? How can I use it, right? Both a little bit to help me in school, maybe some other applications. And those latter two things, you're going to get a lot of variation based on like kind of the student's original understanding, what the teachers can help them with, what's available in the AI literacy course. But something along those lines. And the second idea is, let's get this like into the regular classroom, because AI, it's a general purpose technology, right? Like when it first came out, people said, well, it's like the iPhone. I'm like, well, okay. I mean, we already had phones, like it did these things. It's like the internet. Well, the internet was still current society. Then people started saying it's electricity. Okay, yeah, electricity changed everything. Just think on your day, like how many things are different. Like if you didn't have electricity, how you would live, like just completely differently. And, Benson Wong, the CEO of NVIDIA, says this is really like another industrial evolution, right? We went mass product. We figured out how to stop foraging for food. We went to mass production of agriculture. Then we had energy. That made possible the mass production of goods, and maybe a little bit of kind of how the education model, electricity made it possible, why we have the education model we do today. And now he says, look, in this industrial era, we're literally producing intelligence. That's the product, right? And everybody's going to have intelligence to work with, and that's going to impact everything. So just think of, and I'd love to hear what you think about the sciences, but for me, the social sciences are easy, right? Like the history. You say, okay, well, who were when you're studying the Luddites, right? The people who lost their jobs, right, because they had all the mills, right? And they retaliated against the technology. Well, as people in this era start to lose their jobs, right? And we can debate whether there's more jobs or less jobs over time, but some people are already losing their jobs. Like that's going to happen. What do we expect to happen? We've seen this a little bit. Like I think it was in Germany, people tried to like burn down this Tesla factory, right, and caused $1 billion of damage. In San Francisco, they attacked a driverless car, right? So we're already kind of starting to see like little instances of that, but you can tie that in history. So you can still teach the part of the history that the kids need to do to pass the standardized test, but also compare that to the present. In psychology, I'm sure you could talk about, there's a lot of mental health care now developing around bots, right? So you could talk about that in psychology. In English, you could talk about, well, obviously there's writing and how stories are produced. And maybe in some combination of English or history, you're talking about what it means to be human and how being human is different from those machines. In economics, we're probably going to see, in addition to unemployment, we're going to see prices decline because it's just a lot cheaper to produce goods, right? So kind of when you have some deflation in many parts of the economy, what happens at the same time? You're going to see these big companies, their profit, the stock market's profits are going to kind of go through the roof. So because there's a limited number of companies sitting on top of all this technology. So what kind of dynamics do you have there? So I think there's, in health, right? Like, I mean, they're already talking about social media in health class, at least a little bit in the United States. So that could spill over there. And like, so I think there's something all to be said. And, I'd love to hear about how you're using it in your science classes. I mean, you already are, right? But, I don't think every teacher is. You probably know maybe 5-10%, right? So,
yeah, what you realize is that we're in a very niche professional learning network, and even like very fortunately, we were talking over in Bucharest the weekend, the teachers there that have sort of are still getting into this idea of prompting, are still being introduced to it and trialing it for the first time. And we're a year into this technology now, or post that. And so it's still coming to the forefront of a lot of educators. And the reason for that is simply because of the professional development, or the leading voices, as it were, actually being able, within their schools, within their districts, within those countries, being able to offer something. And it's an interesting one from my side, that we talk about all these fantastic advancements it's going in, but actually we haven't paused to kind of go, right, what is, and I like Darren's version of this, what are the layers we need teachers, educators, students to be at? So like, what is your introductory level to AI in terms of what do we want them to do, which is like, just plan a lesson.
Right. Use it for something you already know, you already do, right?
Yeah, create an activity, something you already know, so you can therefore go, well, that's right, that's wrong, well, I like that. And then beyond that, it's looking at things like, and we mentioned this, data analytics. So from a science perspective, where it's now getting really good is the ability to spot patterns and analyze data, and even the advanced models, you can get kids to sketch out graphs, sketch out tables. You can take a photo of it and upload it, and it will convert that into the digital component for you. So all of a sudden, these quick skills and helping out, and then you can go, right, ask the questions. What's the analysis? What are the patterns? So the data analytics of it is great for science. It's not always great then for creating science-based images, because there's lots of technicality to that. And if you want models, you want things to be able to label diagrams, it's terrible for that at the moment with science. But for me, I think where it's the couple of things it is really useful for is one, professional development, and then second is creativity. Like professional development, if you go back to when, even the most recent form of research and evidence took place, it was published is well before the original 2021 sort of learning stage. People are still using Rosenshine's principles from, the 20th century. You're still talking about Bloom's taxonomy, all these different things, cognitive science. So actually, it's been trained on those things. So you can find and understand and learn so much about that. And then you just kind of use those as frameworks. You can go, right, actually, can you design me an activity that uses, Rosenshine's fifth principle about questioning or something? Or, and I was going through it with a teacher the other day, and I said, look, this is how you can do it. And then we both learned something, because it started to talk about depth of knowledge by Webb. And it's like, oh, it's pulled that in for us. And now we can apply that. And so it's, for me, that, and then bringing creativity. And I'll give you a prime example, because you'll probably like this, actually. So I teach social studies to a year 8 class, and we've just finished learning about South Asia. So it's 7 lessons, but the term is, let's say, 10 lessons long. So I type into ChatGPT, hey, I've been teaching year 8 social studies. I've just finished. It's on South Asia. There's no assessment. There's no project anything. I don't know what to do. Can you give me some ideas? So it lists off all these ideas. And one of the things that on there, MUN. Do a model United Nations for these guys that are 13-year-olds, 12, 13-year-olds. I'm like, I'm not an MUM teacher. I don't know a lot about it. I don't know a lot about debating. But I could then use ChatGPT and go, hey, this is a really good idea. Can you help me elaborate? Can you come up with, and it did. Like it came up with right, let's think of something that ties into the SDG. So it's like, let's do something on climate change. So all of a sudden last week, my kids pick their countries. They did their research. They wrote out their opening statement. They wrote their 1-2 page pieces that goes into it. This is how much I know about it. You can tell. And then today, actually in class, they delivered their opening 1-minute speech about, hey, I'm a delegate from this country. This is our stance on climate change. This is what we want and need. And we had the South Asian countries. We had some of the big hitters like the US, China, Russia. And then we had other countries that are involved. So Saudi Arabia in this area, Japan, to technology. And the kids went off and started getting into blocks and negotiating. And so next week, I'm like, right, what can we get them to do? And so they're going to write sort of their piece on who they're going to work with, what they want to do and achieve. And it's like, perfect. And I on my own would never have generated that type of lesson, because I don't know enough about it. But I know enough about AI, and I know enough about pedagogy to be able to produce something from that. So for me, those layers in terms of it's fantastic. I use it for other things. I use it for creating podcasts with kids. I use it for generating images and all the other parts. And obviously now we're seeing this more creativity of what we can do with it. But it stems back to this concept of what is innovation. And I'm a big fan of just the synergistic work with it and what it can do, and it's just super, super powerful. But what you realize, like you say, is 5% of teachers. We're a year on, and we're still saying 5% of teachers, and that shows that there's probably not enough professional development, learning, all sorts of different things going on to actually. And I'm going to use the word upskill, because I believe that's what it is. It's a skill to be able to use it. And you can create tasks, activities, lessons with it that on your own you would just not be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, it goes, Jan LeCun always says, well, in the future, everyone will work with these really intelligent assistants. And like, we're already doing that. Like, you brought up a great example, right? Like, he's like, okay, well, I don't know a lot about debate or MUN, but like, I have my assistant here. It's like, oh, well, Stefan knows a lot about debate, but like, yeah, I'm not going to like wake him up in the middle of the night or when I have the urge to learn about debate. So, I'm going to find out like, okay, I want to make sure my memory of Bloom's taxonomy in my case is like correct. So I'm going to, call this professor. It's like, no, I'm just going to type this in. I don't even need to go dig through all the links or, I wanted to proof my email. So just use Grammarly. That's my grammar assistant, right? Like there's my artist assistant, like producing the image. So these things are really helpful to a lot of people, right? Teachers, like school administrators, anybody to have all this additional intelligence is incredible. And it allows you. And the one thing I really like about like these simulations, whether they're MUN or debate, they don't solve the problem completely, but there's this concern about like, oh, well, the never dying concern of the kids writing their paper with an AI, which is getting, obviously like nearly impossible to know. But I feel like when a kid's like, when it's their speech, when they're going to be in a simulation or they're going to be in a debate, when they're expressing themselves, then they're much more likely to like write their own thing. They care, right? Like, I don't think like, maybe some kids just has ChatGPT or whatever write it because they didn't do their homework. That's still going to happen. But they're not going to understand their argument. And like, so they're not going to be able to do very well in the simulation. And B, it's just not going to happen as often, right? Like, yeah, I mean, if you just need to crank out a memo that, like most people aren't going to read or care about or whatever. You use ChatGPT. But, when people really want their own voice, they're more likely to use it. Like, we see on LinkedIn now this like thing, well, people are writing with LinkedIn. It's like, yeah, okay. I don't. I have it corrected because I really care about like what I'm posting on there. But other people, they're just trying to generate business and they kind of spam the thing. So, but to me, the point is that goes back to your purpose. Like, what are you trying to accomplish, right? And the more likely the kids have an engaging activity, the more likely they are to do it. Like I described the debate earlier. The AI can output the whole debate. It's like, okay, but if I sent my kids into a debate with that, I could write that out for them too ahead of time. If I just sent them in a debate with that, they would lose because they wouldn't understand what they were talking about, right? They wouldn't be able to survive the cross-examination. They wouldn't be able to articulate things in the last speech. It would be obvious to the judge that they had no idea what they were talking about. They were just reading off a sheet of paper, right? So, I think these activities that are more enabled, and I think we'll see the systems evolve quite substantially, right? Because they're also going to be able to evaluate the kids' interaction skills, communication skills, all those things, right, over time, as we see the advances in these other models. So, we already have, language, a lot of sentiment analysis where just, it just needs to be integrated into the listening, which it is in some places. So I think those things just open up so many opportunities. But where you see teachers battling against it, they go, I'm just giving all my original assignments and trying to stop the kids from using, ChatGPT or whatever to complete the assignments. It's just like a losing battle, right? It's like once in a while, I feel like you're a sniper. Like you pick off a kid, you catch a kid. Out of the 30 kids who used it, one kid finally confesses and that one kid gets in trouble, right? And then you think the other 29 didn't use it because you didn't catch them, right? So there's just this kind of these ongoing battles that really aren't helping anyone that are eventually, I think we've seen over time fail completely because the writing is getting more personalized. And, the way I see it, it's like, how are we leading? everyone's talking. And, it kind of scares me a little bit. This technology is like barely off the ground. And there's already discussions all over LinkedIn, Facebook, anywhere you want to talk about it. Oh, humans still matter. Like we still matter. We can still do stuff. We need to be the human in the loop. We need to lead, right? And people are already freaked out about that when the technology is barely functional. So think about it in a few years, right? But the only way humans are going to lead it, and, I have different thoughts about staying in the loop. I don't think we'll stay in the loop in all areas, but we can keep leading it. But the only way we're going to lead it is to lead it. Otherwise, the technology is going to lead us. It's really smart. It can do a lot of stuff, and it's just going to get better and better and better and better at doing all those things. It will be smarter. It already is smarter than us in some ways, right? So if we don't engage it, if we just try to block it, the blocking won't succeed. The technology will take the lead. AI will literally lead us if we try to. We're not going to defeat the AI. It's smarter than we are. It will be smarter than we are. The only way to lead it is to actually lead the technology. That's why I get excited. When I see like Matthew and Darren and yourself and others, right, like trying to like embrace and get ahead. And I said, there's no obvious answers. We're all looking for ideas. But if we don't do that, if people don't lead it, then they're going to be led. It's a forced choice.
In the dynamic world of education, it's crucial not to put the cart before the horse. Developing digital strategies without a solid foundation in technology can lead to missteps. That's where our partner, Smart Technologies, comes in with their invaluable resource, the EdTech Assessment Tool. This free, quick survey provides a comprehensive look at where your school or district currently stands in terms of digital technology utilization and how effectively teachers are integrating it into their classrooms. Consider it your first step towards building a robust digital strategy, making sure you're ready for advanced discussions on topics like AI in education. Now, if you want to gauge your school's tech readiness, click the link in the description below to access the EdTech Assessment Tool from Smart Technologies and start building a stronger foundation today.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we're at that kind of the precipice or the crossroad now, aren't we? Where we kind of, what do we need our students to be able to do? And if we're saying, right, we need students to be prepared, we need them. You made an interesting point there about skills. And I've heard a lot of people I talked to recently talk about the value of knowledge. And it's like, well, actually, there's certain things where knowledge is actually quite valuable, and to know certain things and to be able to do certain things. Yeah. But is that then a misconception of what is a skill, or of what students then need to be able to do and how they can utilize technology? So at one side, we've got this challenge of what do we want from our students versus the other side of how do we need to get our educators, skillful enough and knowledgeable enough to be able to deliver the type of lessons, the activities that allow students to do that. But first and foremost, you don't have to nail your flag to the mast, but you do need to have a decent platform that you got to use, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't think it's that hard to know what our students need. Like Yuval Harari, the historian who always talks about this. He's, we don't know like what our students are going to need like 20 years from now. We just have no idea. I don't really think that that's true, right? Like, first of all, you need to develop the students, right? Like as people, we've always tried to do that in education. It didn't matter if you had a student, maybe you realized like, maybe didn't have all the intellectual capacity or those you didn't just say, well, we're not going to develop that student because they're not the valedictorian, because there's already students who are smarter than them, right? If we go to work and there's someone who's smarter than us, we don't just like not show up to the meeting because we say, well, the smart people, they've got it covered, right? So you're always trying to develop people like to the best of their abilities. Then the second thing is everybody needs foundational knowledge. Like, how can you take care of your own health if you don't understand basic biology? Right? Like you need at least some basic math, right? Like, and you can question, well, why is everybody learning calculus and all these things to begin with? Part of it, they're just trying to demonstrate something. Like most people never use calculus in their life after high school, right? So, okay, but you're learning in that thing, you're developing foundational knowledge and you're learning how to learn. Whether I'm learning calculus or biology or history, I'm learning how to learn, right? And then, history, you have to learn some history. You can't bind yourself as your culture. I always say if we don't teach kids history, the Russians will teach them history. And, that changes their perspective, right? So, there's a lot of things that kids learn in school that they need to learn. Now, maybe there's an overemphasis on content because we know they all forget it. We know that after you give them the final in June, that if you retested them in August, their probably score would be at least 20% lower. We don't do that because we know it's the case, right? So, so they're not retaining like anywhere near the amount of information we think they're like. When you get in the test in June, I don't know what the average is. Maybe the average across the school is like 80%. So they've only retained 80% of like what you taught them. And then come the fall, they've like dropped like 20 or 30% of that, right? So they're not retaining all the knowledge anyhow. But, knowledge is important. And, learning how to, I think, use these technologies, now it's going to change. Like, I don't know that we'll be text prompting forever. I think, we're already moving towards just kind of a voice interaction. And, even the prompting skills that you need have declined. Used to be a lot of value to typing out these long prompts. Now you can literally ask it to write you a prompt. And then you can edit that, right? Or sometimes it'll just show you, okay, well, this is the sentence you typed in. This is like everything else I did to get you where I think you wanted to go. That's pretty amazing. And that's kind of similar to human conversation, right? Like when we're having this conversation, we don't revisit. When you ask me a question, you don't, it's not like 3 paragraphs long. You don't go through every detail. Like I kind of figure out what I think you're asking and vice versa, right? So, but learning how to kind of interact with these technologies, learning how to think about like, okay, well, what makes me like a capable individual, a person? We're seeing a lot of that on LinkedIn too. What is actually a person? Stuff we've never thought about. How do I interact with a machine that is eventually, quite honestly, basically going to be very similar to me, right? And other than being a biological being, it's going to be very similar to me, right? Like we know what it's missing. We know it can't do advanced reasoning. We know it can't plan at all. We know it doesn't like have a persistent memory, but those things are like almost certainly going to be overcome. So you think about today's like kindergartners, they're going to live in a world where like when they graduate from high school, I'd be shocked if the machines basically can't do everything they can do. And if they can't, it's going to be like at the margin, right? It's going to be like maybe there's something a machine can't do that humans still can, but then there's other things that a machine's going to be able to do way better than a human. We already know it. It can account for more data and make better projections into the future. That's not even a debate. We know it's basically already competitive with humans at tumor detection, right? So it's going to leapfrog and continue to leapfrog over humans in some ways. I think in education, I'm working on a paper about this, it's going to be able to produce more reliable and valid assessments. Why? Well, reliability is easy. It has more data to draw from, right? So it's going to be a more reliable assessment. Why will it be more valid? Probably because it's going to know how to be an instructional designer. And unlike the teacher, who throws a quiz together before class and doesn't think that carefully about like all the ways like the quiz needs to be valid. That's no offense to everybody. We all do it, right? Okay. It's going to be able to do that automatically, right? Like you don't sit there and perseverate about like how valid your quiz is before you, a lot of times you're like, oh, no one did the reading. Like here's a quiz. I'm going to catch you. Right. So it's going to be like way better at that kind of stuff. It's going to be way better at predicting like what types of placements kids need for like classes. And that's when you get into human in the loop a little bit, right? Like parents are going to challenge school decisions. They're going to come in with like piles of data on their kids and piles of data about how these things are determined, and they're going to challenge them. And it's going to happen. And they're not wrong to do it because there's not going to be this fluffy, like, oh, well, this kid's kind of close. Like, maybe they should go in this AP class or IB or whatever system you're using, right? Like everyone's kind of making those gut determinations. It's not going to fly anymore, right? Like they're going to have data about literally every kid in the whole school that was or wasn't in one of those classes. And they're going to be able to use that to benchmark whether or not Johnny goes in there. And if they don't make the decision the parent wants, the parent's going to use that data and argue against them. And the parents will have a valid ground. So that's coming, right? Like kids are going to start challenging their grades, right? Like more subjective grades. Like, hey, I asked my paper for feedback from this like AI tutoring system, right? Which has data points of like millions of kids. And based on your rubric, it thinks I should have like a 95 and you give me an 83. So what's up? Right. And you're going to say like, oh, well, and it's nice to say, well, the teacher gets to make the final decision until those students are maybe members of a minority group. And someone says, well, why? Why is this student? So why have you given this student who's Black or Hispanic an 83 when the machine says they should have a 95? And those conversations are going to get very, very difficult.
So what do we do? I mean, we're here, we know we're kind of predicting these things to happen, and they're a lot closer than maybe we want them to be, but they're going to happen. So let's think about you, your knowledge base, all the things you're doing. And you mentioned some of the papers, and you've got other ones that you've written. Like in your position and having gone through and worked with the people you've done in the schools you've gone, what should we be doing? What should schools be doing to be, what's the word I'm looking for here? So to be, instead of being reactive, being proactive and say, look, we know this is coming, guys. These are the steps. These are the things. What are your recommendations? What are your ideas for in terms of schools could be doing?
I think schools almost need like two groups. Like you need this group of like, what are the immediate questions, right? Like there's immediate questions related to, okay, do we want to adopt like an AI literacy curriculum? Like what capacity? Do we want to allow wearables in schools? Do, our school want, and there's variation on this, right? Like do our schools want to allow or encourage writing detectors or don't we? Those are short-term things, right? Then there's a second thing is like, well, where's this technology going to be in 3 to 5 years? And you can't just say like, well, we don't know, so I'm not going to deal with it. Like, right? Like that's ridiculous. We all know generally where the technology is headed. Whether it'll get there in year 3 or 4, or it'll have exact detail of this capacity, that's a little bit unknown. But we know that the models are going to have more persistent memory. We know they can create more valid assessments based on reliability. Like that's known. Whether somebody takes that technology and puts it into an app that educators can use, that may take a year. But obviously, they can already collect and analyze more data points than any human brain, right? This is not like an issue, right? So you need to think ahead, and you need to involve people that have thought about these things, right? And when I say, okay, well, people from who've thought about how this works in AI, but also administrators in the school who have a lot of experience with assessment, right? Like they need to be the ones that are part of that conversation, not just the ed tech people. I love ed tech people, but this isn't just about ed tech. This isn't Quizlet. This isn't a smartboard. A smartboard cannot learn on its own. A smartboard cannot teach a student. A smartboard cannot interact with a student and say, gee, Johnny's having a bad day, or Johnny doesn't understand this concept in math, so I'm going to change how I teach it, or I'm going to reteach it because on the last test he got a 0. We've never had a piece of educational technology that can do this. And that's the one thing we point out in our review of the guidances that's coming out today that I talked about. It comes from this Department of Education report. It says, well, we imagine it like an e-bike, and you can choose to get on the e-bike and ride it and tell it where to go. Okay, well that's a useful imagination, but that's not what this technology is. The technology is a bike that can decide to upright itself when it thinks it should, interact with the student, teach the student how to ride the bike, have the student tell it, gee, I want to go to this destination, figure out what the best map is to get to the destination, and kind of drive the student to the destination. That's what this technology can do. This technology, yes, it doesn't have all these human capacities, and it doesn't have this emotional connection, but it can already do these things. But how long it takes somebody, everybody's now focused on the people with the really high skills, the AI skills and development. They're focusing on industry, because they can make millions, if not billions of dollars off the Fortune 500. But education is a large sector. It's worth $20 trillion. And it's expected to be the most impacted sector. Healthcare and education are where people say they're the most two sectors. So these are going to be developed, and they're already nascent. So people need to start thinking about this and stop pretending this is like a television that came into the classroom. It's not. It's something that's completely different. It is. In one of the guidances, it says this is not a human brain. I mean, this is not a brain. It's not a human brain. Well, of course, it doesn't currently have all the capacities of a human brain. And maybe it won't, but it has a lot of the capacities of a human brain. It can read, it can listen, it can write, it can reason at a very basic level. Nobody says it can do anything beyond a basic level, right? They anticipate it'll be more advanced levels. It can connect two dots and come up with a creative solution. Your smartboard can't do that. Okay. So these all things are developing just like the human brain. That's the goal. For better or worse, then there's a lot of criticism of this, right? It goes back to the Turing test. What did Alan Turing say? Well, once it can do what a human can do, then we'll have real AI. So the whole focus for the last 70 years now has been to develop artificial intelligence is replicating the human brain. Sylvester says it in kind of a little way. It's a little bit disturbing, but that's the goal. That's and it already has some of these capacities. And the fact that it's artificial doesn't really matter. Probably in the end, it'll just mean it's superior in some ways to the human brain and inferior than others. But just to give you an example, and Jeff Hinton will give this example. Basically, a human brain, has 100 trillion connections. the most like advanced AIs that are out on the market now, they estimate like around like 2 trillion. Okay, but think about that. No human has read the entire, with 100 trillion connections, has read like the whole internet. Okay, the AIs have read, the advanced AIs have read the whole internet and kind of essentially been trained on that and can spit it back out. And you can talk about different ways that'll happen using only 2 trillion connections. So there's a huge difference there between, the number of connections of a human brain versus like even an advanced AI system. But what that advanced AI system can do with 2 trillion connections is way more than we're doing with 100 trillion connections. So it's not exactly like a human brain, but that kind of like, in my mind, kind of like begs the question. It's the same way like everyone's debating on LinkedIn, like, oh, well, can it ever have, like, can it be just like an intelligence of a human? Like, who cares, right? If it can detect tumors better than a doctor, that's significant, right? If it can predict the hedge market equity, like it can already do that. Like, and the banks are already using them. They're not relying on humans, right? So who really cares if it can do everything a human can? If it can do everything that you can when you go to work, then you're not going to have a job. If it can do 90% of what you can when you go to work, you may not have a job because maybe your employer doesn't think that other 10% is worth like $100,000 or whatever you're getting paid, right? Or maybe they'll like combine positions and say, okay, well, this one person can now do the work of 10 people. We still need a human to do these things, but all the 10 people, it can do 90% of their job. So now we only need one human in the AIs. Right. So, not to kind of go continually into that, but this, I don't know how else to say it. This technology is like a big deal. It's going to change society. It's going to change education, whether you can ignore this in your school. You're just going to start losing students. It doesn't make any sense. Right. Like, it's just really kind of that simple. So I think there needs to be like a team that's kind of a little bit thinking ahead. And these things aren't like far into the future. Like I say, it already does more reliable prediction. It already does that. So why can't you apply that to schools that you operate, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense that you can't apply that to placement decisions if you can apply it to betting on the stock market and the equity markets, right? The technology already exists. It's just more when somebody walks into a school with an app, or a lawyer who loves suing schools, like starts collecting all this data and shows up at the door and be like, oh, you didn't put Johnny in like AP physics. Like the decision was obvious. And I'll make a discrimination claim too, based on like Johnny's race.
It sounds a lot like health insurance, like the amount of data health insurance companies have. Like, I remember listening to this on a podcast. I think is it Gary Brecker, the 10X guy, like used to work for health insurance. He said the amount of data they have, and you're right, it's going that way. So let's just try and figure out what is it then we need to do. Like, we've got one side of it in terms of how do we prepare students for this,
right?
And then the other side of it is, well, what is it that schools now need to do? We know that this is coming. If there's a couple of things then that we can highlight for, right, this is what schools do first, and then this is what we need to be preparing students to be able to do. Where do we go with that?
Well, I thought on the student side, I'm a big fan of the Innovation Academy, right? Like, and I think of the academy as just kind of elements, right? You have this AI literacy, you start infusing it into the curriculum, which creates exposure to other teachers. It creates exposure for other teachers, allows them to build out. Then the next year you do a little bit more and you kind of add it in. I think those are all practical steps. Then on the so that's like on the instructional side. Right. Then on the administrative side, I think, like I say, there's two questions. One is like, what do we do with these short-term challenges, like the writing detectors, the wearables? Like, are the teachers allowed to use these tools for assessment? If so, like, do they have to be disclosed? Which tools can they use? Like, where does the private information get like put in there? And then the second, I think there's a future forward team. Like, what are we going to do when these grander challenges start to become concrete? And that doesn't involve a lot of speculation. Right? Like, it's just like I say, we already know that it can make better predictions. We already know AI can make better predictions than any human. A human cannot process that much data. Right? So, like, what are the things that we do in our school that involve making predictions? One of the things that's quite obvious to me is predicting whether Johnny can succeed in like AP physics or whatever the equivalent is. Right? So how do we actually use AI to help inform that decision? So when a parent comes to the door, you can say, okay, well, we collected some human recommendations. We considered like what this AI tool has to say, and this is the decision we arrived at. Like, we considered what the AI had to say, right? And it's a combined decision. And that's a lot more justifiable than like, well, these 3 teachers who had Johnny in class thought he should or shouldn't be in AP physics. I don't really know how that's justifiable when you're comparing. You have Johnny's entire academic profile that the AI also knows, and all the other students who have been or not placed in there. To me, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I'm sure some people listen to that and like, people are very committed to like this human in the loop. We're already seeing it disappear in many areas. It's been a debate actually in the military for a long time because people said the human should really maintain the final decision about whether the weapon's fired. Well, that sounds great, but humans can't decide that fast, and they can't have as much data, right? So if both sides in the conflict agree, the human, like, I don't know how that works, but both sides in the conflict agree and they're just honest and they say, well, we'll leave the humans to be the final decision makers, then I guess it's fair for everybody. If not, like, the AIs will probably win the battles. So, you're already kind of seeing a human get removed in the loop there. You're seeing a human get removed in the loop in the hedge equity markets. We're seeing the human get removed in the loop in the stock markets. And I think like teachers, like in most cases, have even less data, right? Because if you think about it, you are in a sense in a school trying to maximize the data you use, right? Like you wouldn't let the first year guidance counselor make the final decision about whether Johnny goes in AP physics. If the parents challenge it, you'd look to the more experienced teachers and guidance counselors who really, why? You don't say it explicitly, because they have more data, right? Because they have more experience and they can kind of have a better prediction about whether or not this kid's going to be successful in that class. Now it's like, okay, there's millions. Like, Elon Susker talks about this in comparison to medicine. Why do you want, if you have a serious illness, why would you want to go to a more experienced doctor if you had a more serious illness?
It's a good question. You'd probably look at it and go, you would assume that the more experienced doctor is therefore better. And maybe would have seen. Yeah, but
I think there's a good reason, even if you don't think it through, right? It's like, well, they've seen so many more patients. They're going to have a little more experience about whether this treatment is going to work or not, right? Well, now maybe you have an AI that's seen 100 million patients and can create more distinctions between those patients, not just like, okay, this is person's male, this is female, they're in this age category. There are these treatments. I saw this treatment work really well on 53-year-old salary. Okay, so I'll try this one again, right? It can break down all the 100 million patients into many more categories and look at the treatments and, of course, have read, so to speak, every published paper that's been written about that, right? Whereas no doctor can do that, right? So they talk about this, like you say that, the estimate to an FDA certified doctor is 5 to 6 years, right? That you'll be, at least for some things, you're going to be able to go to an FDA certified doctor. So I don't understand it. If doctors, if we expect that AI can make decisions about medical treatment as well or better than a human, why are we not thinking ahead and saying, well, gee, like an AI is going to be able to design an assessment as well or better than a human if we train it to do that, right? I'm not talking about like what ChatGPT 4 can do right now. It hasn't necessarily been trained on those particular things, right? If an AI trained doctor can make a prediction about what treatment is right for a serious illness, why can't it basically use the same concepts and ideas, which I think is something you cover in AI literacy, right? Like how these things work. Why can't it use the same concept and ideas to help improve the odds? It's never going to be perfect. No human's perfect. Right. And there's a lot of variables as to what physics class Johnny should be in. It's the same principle, just applied in a different context. Right. So if you take the principles that we already have and the way we're already using these tools and you say, well, how do they apply in education once they become into education? Those are the things we have to start thinking about. You can't wait till it happens. You don't want to wait till the parent shows up at the door and uses AI to challenge Johnny's placement. You don't want to wait till next fall when the kid first comes into class with a prescription pair of brilliant glasses. You can get these in prescription. You're going to tell the kid he's not allowed to wear his prescription glasses in class? Or he's not allowed to come to school until like he goes and gets a different pair of glasses? Right? Like you have to like think ahead, right? About like how you want to kind of handle these situations, right? Like schools didn't think about like deep fakes. I'm kind of mad about this. I mean, I'm not like I'm a growing voice, but not a huge voice. I told schools last spring, I said, kids are going to use the deep fake. They're going to create nude images of their friends. They're going to circulate them around and you're going to have to deal with this. So start thinking about it. New York Times or Wall Street Journal, I forget. Kids in New Jersey circulate, right? Like new AI image of their friends. The whole town is shocked. It's like, because you didn't pay attention. You didn't think ahead. No one wants to have to make a decision in a crisis, right? Sometimes that's inevitable. School administrators have to deal with stuff like that all the time. But there's things you can think about ahead of time. And if you just talk to people who kind of see where AI is going, they can help you say, like, all right, here's 10 things you need to start thinking about. And if you think about those 10 things, then when other similar things arise, you'll have a lens to process through, right? Like, someone's not going to be able to tell you like every single situation that's going to happen. But there are things that are going to happen in categories. Like I say, people are going to say AI can make better assessments. There was just a study that came out. This is kind of related. It's kind of funny. The study just listed the quiz answers, no question. And the AI was able to figure out what the question was just from the answers and answer it. And it got like a 95%.
So like Jeopardy.
Yes, exactly. Right. So, but it's even more extreme. It's like, it's like one of these things is not like the other. And the one that's not like the other is actually the answer, because there can only be one answer unless it says, A and B combined. Right. So that's pretty impressive technology, right? Do people just say, oh, well, it's not fully human. Okay. It's not Albert Einstein. When you say, well, whatever, you can ignore Joe. He's not Albert Einstein. We don't live like that. Right. Right. So the technology, regardless of where it'll ultimately grow, there's a big debate about that. It's really impressive, and it just keeps getting more impressive by the day. And I don't really know how you can ignore that, right? Because it's going to lead to a different society than the one we live in now. The example I gave way back when I talked in the Cottesmore conference last day is like, okay, so in like the 1800s, kids went to school till the 9th grade, and you taught them basic math and literacy because they were basically going to be farmers, right? And they could sell their goods in the market with the basic math and the basic literacy. And maybe you kind of helped them a little bit at school, learn how to like grow some corn or whatever, right? Imagine in the 20th century, we only cared about literacy and basic addition, and we taught kids how to grow crops. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? So so we need to kind of start thinking about, okay, when somebody has, and the other example I'll give is this. So little kids at every, some grade level, they have to do a science project, and they show up at school and they present the science project, and it's on like this like cardboard thing. Okay. And everybody knows that their mom and dad helps them make this cardboard thing, because there's no way the kid on his own or her own could have made that cardboard thing. Like, everybody knows the kid's parents helping them. And you actually feel bad if a kid parents doesn't help them and their thing doesn't look very good. Right. But that's kind of part of like it's part of the parent child bonding. It's part of the school experience. It's part of the growing up. But basically AI means that every kid has that for every assignment. Yeah. It means their parent is literally sitting with them every night and not just guiding them maybe through their homework, but literally helping them do it, helping them make that board, right? Like, or at least that's available. So
there's a few people listening to that. Like, I imagine there's going to be people listening or watching, and one of them would go, okay, we've mentioned a lot there about the data and the usage and the availability of it. Like, where do we draw the ethical line in this?
Well, to me, like, the ethical question is like, the ethical question always comes back to what the assignment is. You can't just say like, and what the learning goal is, right? Because, if a teacher or professor's learning goal is to help a kid write with AI and they use AI, that's not unethical, right? If the school says we want full AI integration, and I did talk to one school like that, then then not using the AI maybe is unethical, right? So it always kind of comes back to, for the student, to me, it comes back to like what the assignment is. And I do generally think that, like, especially like I tell my own kids, like, okay, like the teachers only have so much knowledge of this. You can't expect them, just do the assignment as you're told. It'll be fine, right? Like, I can help you learn about AI if you want, right? So just do the assignment, just kind of play along. Kids do that anyhow. They know some of the assignments before AI they did in school. They're like, this is pointless, right? It's busy work. I'm just going to do it and play along. Like, just go along. And second, every assignment doesn't have to involve AI. That doesn't make sense either, right? Like, kids need to learn things. Then you think, well, what is the ethical obligation of the teacher or like the school administrators making the meta decision? To me, it's kind of like, well, if you're just trying to block AI from school entirely, like, I don't know why that's ethical. I'm not saying like people who are doing that are like bad people. I think they're doing it for like good reason. Like they think kids shouldn't learn with AI. So I don't want to say like they're kind of unethical in that sense, but like you got to think about like, well, what is your obligation to your students? And that's why I think when you're making these decisions, like what are your values and your goals, right? Like every school says they got to prepare students for the future. Like, I mean, come on, like who's going to, no, we don't prepare kids for the future, right? Everybody, well, what does that involve? Well, now I think it involves beyond learning durable skills, beyond learning basic knowledge. It involves helping the students learn to work with AIs. Everyone's going to work with an AI. There's no debate about that. In the future, like what percent of jobs are you going to go do where you don't work with an AI? 1%? Okay. So you want to help the students start to learn how to work with that. Now, at what stage do you want to do that? And like, how do you want to do that? Like, how do you introduce it? You know, those are debatable questions, right? Like nobody knows the exact answer to that. But to me, to say like the answer is never, like I actually don't think that's ethical, because that doesn't prepare kids for the future, right? It doesn't have to be all the time, but I just think people need to reflect a little bit more on like, well, what are we preparing students for? Then of course there's questions of capacity. Like I think in some ways this rush to use AI has been a little problematic, right? Because it's like, okay, teacher, just use AI, prepare kids for the future. And she's like, okay, I'll use AI. I'll just do all my grading with the AI. Well, the models aren't good enough and applied well enough yet to turn all the grading over to the AI. They may be soon, okay? Especially when they're trained for a specific purpose and all those kind of things. So this rush to like do everything in AI can be a bit detracting. So you got to think there's also an ethical obligation of like, how do we do this? And in like what appropriate way does it happen? But I don't think like these ethical questions are like answered in the abstract. The ethical question is, how do you do it? Like you don't look at that fourth grade science teacher who knows the parents helping them with their homework and say, well, gee, that's unethical. Because, that's like part of the growing up like child experience that everybody has. And the parents get to post it on social media, right? And say, look, Johnny did the sign. Like, Johnny built this poster and everybody knows you really built a poster, right? But you wouldn't do that for every assignment, right? So I don't think a teacher you see what I'm saying? Like, the decisions are a lot more contextual. People ask me, well, how do you use this ethically in education? Well, it depends on like what your goal is, like what your assignment is, how you're using it. Like what different types of like AI are you using? Everyone says it kind of flusters me a little bit that people are like, oh, we can't allow these into schools. Like it'll threaten the students' privacy because, if they type something into like ChatGPT, it could figure out something about them like indirectly. And then, they won't have any privacy. And I get there are laws about that they have to comply with. Right. But it's like, but then schools are instituting like hall passes, where like a kid wants to use a bathroom, they track like their every movement, like across the hallway and like how many times they go to the bathroom and how long they're in the bathroom. Well, what's like a greater threat to a student's privacy? Like monitoring like their every body movement and how long they spend in the bathroom, or like OpenAI learning that they like have some interest in exploring the moon, right? Because they asked ChatGPT about that, right? Now, so I'm saying that's absent the question of the law. And I think you can design both systems in a way that are less threatening. But, to me, that presents much greater ethical questions than whether a kid uses ChatGPT to help them with their homework.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me then when you said about that in terms of, browsing something on the internet on one site and then all of a sudden going off to another site and seeing a whole row of adverts for something similar to what you've just been searching for, even though they're two completely different things or two completely different sites. Google's renowned for it, isn't it? You go search for something, all of a sudden it shows up on Facebook or whatever it may be. The data that they share and just happily pass over. I'll give you a prime example. Like I'm here in Dubai, and literally for the past 10 days, 5 times a day, I reckon, I'm getting called from Saudi Arabia, a whole host of different numbers. And it's like, just don't answer it because I know that they just sell. The mobile numbers here are just, passed off. You get cold calls all the time. There is no, and I'm not trying to justify it in terms of, yes, we should be able, data, whatever. It's like, actually, no, we need these companies to some extent to be better with their data protection. I don't want my phone number passed off to someone. I don't want to receive random emails, from these different things about something I may have searched for 2 weeks ago. So, on one hand, we want to protect and protect our students, children, definitely. But on the other hand, we've got these huge corporations that just kind of blow smoke in the face of that, don't they? And just pass it off. So it's a real difficult conundrum we find ourselves in with the ethics of how and when and why to use this thing, like you said, and just to nail down what are the values, what is the purpose of it. And I think it all stems back to that. If we are encouraging our students and guiding our students through the use of this technology, which is what it is, and we want to use it to support their learning, we want to use it to support their well-being, and general support their development. What is it and how are we bringing that to the table? Because again, it's that whole, I'm probably one of a few teachers in my school that are using it thoroughly in class and with students, and then you get one side of it where other students go, well, we want to be doing that, and you get one side of it where the teachers can either go, hey, look, they use this in class, they said you show them this is great, versus the other teacher who goes, they've used this in class and I'm not happy about it. And
Right.
That's the challenging part we're at the moment, isn't it? It's it's a multi-layered, multi-leveled crossroad. And you say we don't have all the answers yet. We're ideating, we're trialing, aren't we? We're trialing new things. But I think from me, having listened to yourself and throughout this conversation, is I don't want us to get to a point where we're trying to sprint before we're even walking through this. As teachers, I think, the idea of Sora is amazing. The idea of being able to generate these videos to support a unique learning opportunity, fantastic. But actually, I still want to focus on teachers being able to use it just to plan a really good lesson. I want teachers just to be able to plan really engaging activities, and for the learning, to be at the forefront, and students enjoying the opportunity, put it real world scenarios or to innovation or project-based learning, all these things that are out there, which would be amazing. So, I mean, just to wrap this up, Stefan, I know we could go on about this for more hours. That's why we were said a year ago, we'll come back in a year's time and we'll have this conversation. Like wrapping this up, if you were to offer, and you are well versed in this, for the teachers and people watching and listening, or educators or students that might be listening, like what would be your golden nugget, as in the thing that they should be able to take away from listening to this, or something they can move into the future that's going to support them and their almost agency with AI?
How can you use AI to make yourself better? That's really, to me, like the fundamental question, right? Because you're not, maybe with the exception of, some rare instance or, application, you're not going to be able to outcompete the AI, right? So like right now, humans can still drive in most environments, not all environments, not fully mapped environments, better than automatic cars, right? So that's something like we can do better. If we turn on the auto drive in our car and we kind of drive with it, that creates the ultimate. That's the most safe experience, right? To use it intentionally, to and you go back to Copilot, right? Just to Microsoft that you were talking about, right? Like when can you produce the best product? When you use it as a Copilot, right? If you just let it try to do your work, it'll do okay, but it's not going to do as well as you can. Right. But when you use it with yourself, like you're even talking about, okay, well, now I have this new idea for a lesson, for a thing, like I can build a simulation, I can build a debate. You're using the AI like to kind of like, you said it yourself, right? Like to teach like a better lesson, right? To engage the students. So how do I use the AI? How to go back to my example, which I kind of fear the parent challenging, right? The placement. Okay. How do I also account for like what AI is saying? How do I explain? How do I use like this data, this big set of data? How do I look at this recommendation? How do I include that with my own knowledge? And then how do I make a better placement decision? It has to be about how AI makes us better. In some cases, it's like, well, we'd rather have the AI do it than the human. Everyone gives the example of a dangerous job. Okay. Right. Like supposedly we're going to replace all the dangerous jobs in the warehouse. At least in the US, aren't many people like dropping dead every day in warehouses. So, I don't think like $675 million is being invested to replace a couple workers doing dangerous jobs. I think they're all going to be replaced. Right. So, but my point more is that, okay, that's a dangerous job. That's something we'd rather have AI do than us. But ultimately, it is how to make us better. And that's what humans need to do. And that's what people outside the quote unquote AI scientist space need to think about. Because what are those scientists, what are the technology companies trying to do? They're trying to make it to replace us. They're trying, for both theoretical reasons, let's make an AI that's just like a human. How does it get sold? It's sold to a business because if you have this AI, you can do some things better. You can improve your marketing. You can improve your cybersecurity. There are all these things you can do better. But hey, how are you going to absorb all this cost? Well, you're going to replace some of your workers, right? So, you can also generate revenue from those previous things. So we need to be the ones who are thinking about how to use it to do things better. And that's one thing I really like about, there aren't too many movies about like sinister educators who are like obsessed with power, right? And trying to be like exploitive. You see movies about lawyers like that, or business people, or just like these shrewd, cunning individuals, right? You see people who go into education are really good people who want to do something better. Now, sometimes maybe they do something bad along the way or they get burned out, but everyone starts there. That's my theory. Everyone starts there. Education is full of people, and most people in there. Education is full of people who want to make the world better. And that's another reason why educators have to engage AI, because otherwise it just gets essentially used by people who don't really care about making the world better. They care about like how much money they can make or like how much power they can have. And educators are the people who have the most potential, in my mind, to use it for good. But if we don't use it, then we're just letting everyone else use it for like whatever they want. To win a war, to start a war, to see how much money they can make, right? So to see how much power they can have, right? To manipulate people. So education, and I think healthcare is like that too. The two sectors are most essentially disrupted. A lot of really good people in those sectors who can do a lot of really good things with the technology, but you won't do a single good thing with it if you ignore it. You won't lead it. You're not going to lead. Whether it's being a human in the loop or just leading in other ways, you're not going to lead if you ignore.
I think that is a very powerful way, a pertinent way. It's got me thinking, how can you use AI to make yourself better? I think that's a great way to finish and close out this conversation, Stefan. As always, massively insightful, massively thoughtful, and
Thank
lots
you.
to take away. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And you're doing some fantastic work out there, not obviously with others that you're working with and papers that are coming out. As we mentioned, got the Innovation Lab that's there for people to use. So the Innovation Academy that's out there. We've got, you've got other papers that are coming out. If people want to learn more about what you're doing and people want to contact you, Stefan, where's the best place for them to find you?
I mean, LinkedIn's the easiest place, right? If you just, you can find me, you can connect on LinkedIn. My email is just Stefan Bauschard at globalacademic.org. But if you reach out in the chat, actually probably be happy to hear from you, because I get spammed every day with hey, do you want to buy some coaching, or do you need some legal help, or do you want me to do your taxes, or I'm actually here to scam you. I'm a person on LinkedIn who looks really beautiful, but actually only has 3 connections. So I'm here to try to hustle you out of some money. So I actually would like to hear from a human who would like to have a conversation about AI and education, or debate really anything related to schools, or just a friendly conversation.
We can do that, can't we? We can definitely do that. So amazing. Stefan, thank you ever so much. As always, an absolute pleasure. Take care, and we look forward to seeing all this new and exciting work that you're doing in the future.
All right. Thank you. You too. Bye.